I wasn't born into much, and I don't say that to earn sympathy. It's just the plain truth. My earliest memory is of a social worker buckling me into the back of a car with too many stuffed animals piled on the seat beside me, telling me we were going somewhere new. New became a revolving door. New foster homes, new bedrooms, new rules. By the time I turned 18, I had packed and unpacked more times than I could count. That kind of life teaches you two things fast: don't get too comfortable and don't expect permanence. By the fall of 1996, permanence wasn't even on my radar. I was 24, heart freshly cracked from a breakup, and carrying the dull ache of failure after losing yet another job in Sheffield. I had been working at a hotel as a maid. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the rent. When they let me go, I didn't argue. I just walked out the revolving glass doors and never looked back. I started scanning classified ads out of desperation. Buried between ads for farmhands and clerks was one that read, "Live-in housekeeper wanted for countryside estate, room and board provided." The words stuck with me like a hook. A live-in position, a place to stay, a chance to start over. I dialed the number before I could second-guess myself. That's how I first spoke with Jonathan Hale. His voice was crisp, every word measured, like he rehearsed his sentences before letting them out. He said he lived in Northumberland in a manor passed down through generations, and he needed someone who could cook, clean, and help restore order to the place. He asked only one personal question: "Are you dependable, Miss Morris?" I said yes. I needed him to believe it, even though my track record said otherwise. The cab driver who picked me up muttered about the Hale estate being a bit out of the way before driving me down narrow lanes bordered by towering pines. When the manor appeared, I felt my chest tighten. It wasn't a home, it was a monument. Tall stone walls, windows like dark eyes, chimneys rising like fists against the autumn sky. Jonathan met me at the door. He was in his late 40s, perhaps 50, neatly dressed in a dark suit even though it was just past noon. His hair was thinning, his jaw sharp, his eyes the palest blue I'd ever seen. He offered his hand, cool and dry, and welcomed me with a politeness that bordered on rigid formality. "Miss Morris," he said, as if the words were etched on a script, "I trust your journey was manageable." He showed me the house with the precision of a curator leading a museum tour. The ceilings were high, the rooms cavernous, each step echoing against wooden floors. He pointed out the library, the dining room, the upstairs hall, and finally, a door at the end of the corridor. "This," he said softly, "is my wife's room. It remains locked. You'll have no cause to enter." He smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes, out of respect. I nodded, though something about the way his hand lingered on the doorknob unsettled me. The rest of the tour was a blur of hallways, staircases, and instructions about silver polish and firewood. By evening, I was in my small attic room, unpacking the little I had. I lay on the narrow bed, listening to the wind batter the windows, wondering what exactly I'd walked into. The first week passed with a strange sort of calm. My duties were straightforward: sweeping, dusting, cooking simple meals. Jonathan was courteous, almost overly so, thanking me for even the smallest task. He insisted I sit with him for tea in the afternoons, though the conversations were oddly one-sided. He asked about my work, but never my past. When I asked about his, he deflected with vague mentions of family obligations. It was on the third night that things began to shift. Jonathan instructed me to set 2 places at the dining table. I thought I misheard him. "For me and my wife," he said without hesitation. His eyes flicked to mine, sharp, daring me to question it. "I expect punctuality. Dinner at 7. I obeyed, though my stomach clenched. At 7, I served roast chicken and potatoes, pouring 2 glasses of red wine. Jonathan sat at the head of the table. Across from him, the second chair remained empty. He raised his glass, clinking it gently in the air. "To Margaret," he said softly, "then drink." I lowered my gaze and excused myself. After dinner, he asked me to place the second plate outside the locked bedroom door. She eats in her room these days, he explained, tone casual, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. The next morning, the plate was untouched, cold, congealed. I carried it to the kitchen and tried to ignore the unease that prickled the back of my neck. The nights grew stranger. From my attic room, I sometimes heard murmurs rising through the floorboards. Jonathan's voice, low and intimate, punctuated by soft laughter. Once, I could have sworn I heard another voice, faint and female, whispering in reply. I told myself it was the wind, the pipes, the tricks of an old house. Still, I pulled the blanket tighter around me. One morning, while dusting the study, I discovered a drawer in Jonathan's desk left unlocked. Inside was a neat stack of photographs. Each image showed a young woman in the same old-fashioned maid's uniform, standing stiffly, smiling nervously. I flipped through them one after another. My chest tightened as I reached the last photo. It was me. The angle suggested it was taken while I was scrubbing the kitchen floor. I hadn't noticed anyone behind me. That evening, Jonathan presented me with a folded uniform. It belonged to a previous maid, he said, voice gentle. Margaret always liked the staff to look proper. I'd appreciate it if you wore this from now on. The fabric smelled faintly of old perfume, yellowed at the collar. My throat closed, but I forced a smile. Of course, Mr. Hale. When I slipped it on that night, the walls seemed to close in tighter, the manor colder, and Jonathan's gaze lingered longer, soft with something I didn't recognize, something that frightened me more than anger would have. By the second week, the manor no longer felt like a house. It felt like a stage, and I, a reluctant actress. Jonathan hovered more often, watching as I swept, as I cooked, as I set the table for two. He'd stand in the doorway, smiling faintly, murmuring, yes, just like that. When I looked up, he'd avert his eyes, as though embarrassed. One evening, I summoned the courage to ask about Margaret. We were seated in the drawing room, the fire hissing low. "Your wife," I began carefully. Was she ill before she passed?" His head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "Who told you she passed?" The question hung in the air, sharp as broken glass. My heart thudded. I just assumed. The locked room, the dinners. Jonathan leaned back slowly, his expression smoothing into something unreadable. "Margaret is very much with us," he said softly. "She's simply delicate. You'll understand in time." I nodded quickly, eager to retreat, though the chill in my bones wouldn't ease. That night, as I carried the untouched plate back from the locked door, I pressed my ear to the wood. Silence, then faintly, the sound of breathing. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the tray. Sleep became impossible. Every creak in the hallway, every gust against the window made my nerves jolt. I began to wonder about the women in the photographs. Had they all left quietly, or had they disappeared without a trace? One afternoon, while Jonathan was away in the village, I searched his room. My hands shook as I opened drawers, rifled through papers. On the nightstand was a framed photo. My stomach dropped. It wasn't Margaret, it was me, my face smiling as though I had posed willingly for him. I had never taken such a photo. The realization froze me. He didn't just see me as an employee. He saw me as someone else, his Margaret. And whatever that meant, it was dangerous. I began planning escape, whispering to myself at night. The manor was isolated, the nearest village miles away, and Jonathan kept the car keys in his pocket. My only chance was to leave while he slept. But the thought of moving through that dark house alone, with those endless hallways and the locked room beside me, left me paralyzed. Jonathan, meanwhile, grew more desperate. At dinner, his hand brushed mine as I set down the tray. His voice trembled. "Don't leave me again, Margaret. I couldn't bear it." His eyes glistened with tears, though his grip on my wrist was iron. "I won't," I whispered, forcing calm. "I promise." Only then did he release me. That night, I packed my small bag in silence. Every sound seemed magnified. The zip of the fabric, the groan of the floorboards. I waited until the house was still, until even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then I crept down the stairs. Halfway to the door, a voice stopped me cold. "Where are you going, Margaret?" Jonathan stood at the end of the hall, robe though loose, eyes wide with terror or fury. I clutched my bag tighter. I need air, just a walk." His smile returned, brittle. "No walks at night, too dangerous. Come back upstairs." He extended a hand. My legs trembled, but I obeyed. For now, the wrong move could end badly. The breaking point came 3 nights later. Jonathan's behavior escalated. His hands lingered on my shoulders. His voice cracked with pleading. "Don't make me lose you again." He followed me into the kitchen, into the study, hovering like a shadow I couldn't shake. I decided it was now or never. When he finally fell asleep in his chair by the fire, I stole the keys. Story 2. The Night Shift. I'd always been the one my family relied on. At 24, I balanced 3 part-time jobs just to cover my younger brother's medical bills. Mom had passed years ago, and Dad worked long hours as a mechanic, barely able to keep us afloat. It wasn't glamorous, but it was survival, and survival was my full-time job. Every night I'd come home exhausted, my feet aching, my hands raw from scrubbing floors and folding laundry for others. But I never complained. Someone had to keep the household going. That September, a flyer tacked to a utility pole caught my eye while walking home from the diner. Live-in cleaning position, remote estate, room and board included. I stared at the words like a lifeline, my heart pounding with a mix of hope and caution. The pay wasn't great, but I didn't need great. I needed enough to keep Daniel's treatments on schedule. By the time I reached Raven Ridge, fog rolled across the streets like a low-hanging blanket. The town was quiet, almost too quiet, with shuttered stores and cracked sidewalks. My cab wound up a narrow, winding road, and there it was, the Blackwell Estate. The mansion was enormous, Victorian with dark stone walls and gables that jutted into the sky like jagged teeth. Windows reflected the gray sky, some cracked, some boarded. I swallowed hard and gripped my suitcase tighter. Mr. Blackwell greeted me at the door. He was tall, thin, with hair combed back so precisely it looked sculpted. His eyes were dark and unblinking, and they weighed on me like judgment itself. "Welcome," he said, voice calm but cold. "You'll have your own room. I have one rule. Never enter the second-floor bedroom at the end of the hall." He paused, the words hanging like smoke. "It's private." I nodded politely, forcing a smile, though my curiosity pricked like a needle in my chest. "Of course," I said. The first few days were ordinary. I polished silver, scrubbed floors until my hands burned, and prepared meals while the house groaned under its own weight. Every evening, I paused outside the locked bedroom. Sometimes I swore I heard dragging sounds, heavy and deliberate, like furniture being moved. I told myself it was just the house settling. Old houses do that, I reasoned. But deep down, unease settled into my bones. Then the storm came. Lightning split the sky while I carried a basket of laundry up the narrow staircase. The hall smelled of wet wood and ozone. That's when I noticed it. The door to the forbidden room was slightly ajar. My chest tightened. I froze, one hand on the doorknob, one on the basket. I peeked inside. The room was dim, lit only by the lightning flashes. On a chair lay a maid's uniform, perfectly pressed but stained with something dark, blood. My stomach churned. And then I saw the hand. Pale, lifeless, curling from beneath the bed like a claw reaching for me. I stumbled back, the basket tumbling to the floor, laundry spilling like a waterfall. My breath caught in my throat. Panic surged. I turned, running down the hall, my feet slipping on the wet wood. At the bottom, Mr. Blackwell was waiting, knife in hand. His calm voice cut through the storm. "You weren't supposed to see her. Now you know too much." I bolted through the back door into the rain, heart hammering. A truck on the road slowed, and I leaped inside, gasping. I didn't stop until the estate vanished in the fog behind me. After that night, sleep became a stranger. Every shadow in my apartment seemed alive, every creak in the floorboards a threat. I avoided mirrors, I avoided silence, I avoided thinking about Raven Ridge, though the image of that pale hand under the bed haunted my dreams relentlessly. I found a temporary job in town while I tried to sort out what had happened, but something about the estate gnawed at me. Part of me wanted to believe it was imagination, a trick of exhaustion and fear. Another part knew the truth. Mr. Blackwell was dangerous, and the house wasn't just empty walls. It had a presence, something that waited and watched. A week later, I returned, not to confront him, but because I couldn't resist knowing. Driving past the estate, I slowed my car. The mansion loomed in the fog, silent, waiting. I noticed movement behind a second-story window, a shadow passing quickly. My stomach sank. I drove away before curiosity could turn into foolishness. In the days that followed, I began noticing things at my new job. Small, subtle reminders of what had happened. Tools missing, items misplaced, whispers in empty rooms. It was as if the fear I'd left behind had followed me. I told myself I was imagining it, but the dread didn't leave. Then came the letters, handwritten, unsigned, slipped under my door. One read simply, "You saw too much." Another, "It's not over." My pulse would spike, hands trembling as I read the words, the penmanship eerily precise, almost clinical. I reported it to the local police, but without evidence, there was nothing they could do. Months passed. I tried to reclaim normalcy. I returned to school, enrolled in night classes, and focused on helping Daniel with his treatments. The letters stopped for a while. I believed it was over. I was careful, always aware of my surroundings, but I refused to let fear rule me. Then came the letters, an estate agent. Someone had bought the Blackwell estate. Curiosity surged, and against my better judgment, I visited. The house was gutted, empty, almost sterile. There was no sign of Mr. Blackwell, no trace of blood, no sign of the maid's uniform. It was as if the nightmare had been a dream, but I knew better. I knew the truth didn't need proof. Danger had a way of leaving nothing behind. Sometimes it hides in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to strike again. Years passed. I moved cities, found steady work, and built a small life of routine and stability. Yet every stormy night, I remembered the cold eyes of Mr. Blackwell, the dragging sounds in the hall, the pale hand beneath the bed. I learned to trust my instincts, to act quickly when fear whispered warnings, and to never ignore what felt wrong. When Daniel finally graduated from his treatment program, healthy and strong, I allowed myself a sense of relief. But the lessons of Raven Ridge lingered. Life could turn on a dime. Fear wasn't something to be ashamed of. It was a signal, a guide. The final reminder came unexpectedly. I received a package in the mail, no return address. Inside was a single pressed maid's uniform. I didn't open it. I left it on the curb, watched the garbage truck take it away. And in that moment, I realized the final truth. The fear I carried wasn't just about Mr. Blackwell or the estate. It was about learning to listen to myself, to act with courage, to survive. I never went back to Raven Ridge. I never tried to confront him. I didn't need to. What mattered was knowing I could face fear and live. Life is unpredictable, dangerous at times, and often unfair. But resilience isn't about avoiding fear. It's about facing it and moving forward anyway. Story 3. The Fractured Mind. When I left Wales, I told myself I was leaving behind every ghost that ever clung to me. My childhood had been a carousel of temporary rooms and temporary parents, foster homes where I was told to be grateful, to smile, to keep my head down. I learned early how to polish silverware until it reflected someone else's face, not my own. I learned how to pack fast because staying too long meant someone would decide I didn't belong anymore. That rhythm followed me into adulthood. Short jobs, small apartments, never rooted, never still. By the time I turned 27, I'd worked in hotels, private homes, and even a retirement facility, always as a housekeeper. Cleaning wasn't my dream. I used to sketch dresses when I was younger, imagining myself as a designer. But survival came first. Survival meant finding work where someone needed me, where I could be useful. My last post ended abruptly when the family decided they wanted staff with more polish. I packed again, rode the train again, and stared at the want ads until my eyes blurred. That was when I saw the notice about a live-in maid needed in Portland, Maine. A chance for a steady roof, steady pay, a fresh start. I bought a one-way ticket before I had the courage to hesitate. The Leonard house was nothing like the old manners of my childhood foster placements. This wasn't creaky wood and faded wallpaper. It was glass and stone, all sharp angles and reflective surfaces, sitting on the outskirts of the city like something pulled out of a magazine. When I walked up the long drive that November afternoon, rain slicking the pavement, I felt swallowed by the sheer size of it. The windows loomed high, cold, like eyes that didn't blink. Mr. Leonard opened the door himself. He was tall, carefully groomed, his dark hair threaded with silver. His handshake was firm, his smile polite but controlled. Mara Whitfield, yes, thank you for coming. He ushered me inside with the air of someone who had already memorized my movements. Mrs. Leonard appeared only briefly in the hall, pale, gliding past in a silk robe without a word. She didn't acknowledge me, only drifted toward the staircase as though I weren't there at all. The house was immaculate, the kind of immaculate that felt less like cleanliness and more like obsession. No speck of dust, no smudge on the glass. My room was tucked in the back, small compared to the cavernous rest of the house, but I told myself it was fine. I'd had less before. The view overlooked the woods, branches swaying in the gray rain. It should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like the trees were pressing closer. Mr. Leonard gave me my instructions that evening, standing in the kitchen with his hands folded behind his back. "Your duties are straightforward," he said. "Dust daily, floors polished, meals prepared at precise times. The upstairs rooms are not to be entered unless I tell you." And he paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Ignore the noises at night, Mara. Just keep to your duties. Everything else is unnecessary." I nodded, though the words lodged like stones in my chest. Ignore the noises. I wanted to ask what he meant, but his expression suggested no answer would come. I unpacked my single suitcase in silence that night, smoothing out the same 2 uniforms I'd worn for years. When the lights flickered once, briefly, I told myself it was the storm. Still, I lay awake long after midnight, listening. The house groaned like an animal breathing. My first week at the Leonard house unfolded with a kind of strange repetition. Dust, polish, sweep, prepare meals that Mrs. Leonard barely touched. She drifted like smoke, moving soundlessly from one room to another, never speaking more than a murmur, and never to me. Mr. Leonard was different. He was present, always, watching from doorways, standing too close when he inspected the table settings, his eyes scanning like he was measuring me against something. The house unsettled me. Doors that should have opened easily were sometimes locked tight. A hallway light flickered every evening at nearly the same time. No matter the weather, at night I'd hear whispers in the walls, soft, rhythmic, almost like the recitation of a prayer. Once I pressed my ear to the plaster and thought I heard my own name. When I asked Mr. Leonard about it over breakfast, his knife paused mid-slice through toast. "I told you, Mara, ignore the noises. They mean nothing." His smile was polite, but his tone was final. I dropped the subject. One rainy afternoon, while tidying the living room, I noticed the couch pushed slightly askew. I bent to straighten it and saw a corner of leather poking out beneath the frame. I pulled it free, a small, locked journal, worn from age, with scratches across its cover. It was heavier than it looked, as though whatever lived inside it carried weight. I tried the clasp, locked. My pulse quickened. I told myself to put it back, but instead I slid it into my apron pocket. For the rest of the day, it pressed against my side like a secret heartbeat. That night, I couldn't stop staring at it. I turned it over in my hands, the scratches catching the lamplight. My fingers itched with curiosity. At midnight, I found a small set of tools in the laundry room. The lock snapped with a soft click, almost too easy. My stomach flipped as I opened it. The first entry was dated the same day, November 10th, 2015, my first day in the Leonard house. I scanned the page and my blood ran cold. Every task I had done that day was written in neat script. She dusted the shelves. She polished the glass table. She stared too long at the locked upstairs door. I dropped the book, my breath shallow. It was impossible. I hadn't written those words. No one had been beside me. And yet, the journal had recorded it all before I even remembered it. I forced myself to turn more pages. Each one documented the days I'd been here. She chopped vegetables clumsily. She hummed while cleaning the floor. She hesitated before knocking on the master bedroom door. My chest tightened. They weren't just records, they were observations, predictions. The last page I turned to chilled me most of all. It was blank except for tomorrow's date, waiting. I slammed it shut and shoved it under my pillow, but I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the words again. She. Who was writing the story of me? And why did it already know what I hadn't yet done? The next day, I went through my routine in a daze, terrified of every movement. Was I performing my life, or was my life being written for me? Each time I reached for a rag, each time I turned a doorknob, I wondered if it had already been written on a page somewhere. The journal sat hidden in my room, though it felt like it burned through the walls, demanding to be opened again. That evening, after dinner, I gave in. My hands shook as I flipped to the entry marked with that day's date. My blood chilled. It described me finding the journal, unlocking it, and reading the words with terror in my eyes. I slammed it close again, breath ragged. It wasn't recording my life, it was dictating it. I was still clutching the journal when the kitchen light flickered. I turned, heart pounding. Mr. Leonard stood in the doorway, silent, his gaze fixed on the book in my hands. He didn't speak at first. The silence stretched until my throat ached. Finally, he stepped closer, his voice low and deliberate. "Do you even remember who you are, Mara?" The words rooted me to the floor. "What do you mean?" My voice trembled. "I don't understand." He tilted his head, watching me like a puzzle piece that refused to fit. "You think you were hired? You think you're the maid?" His lips curved into something like pity. "But you were never hired. This job? It's a memory. You are not who you believe." I clutched the journal tighter. "That's insane. I know who I am." He shook his head slowly. "Do you? Then why does the book know your every move? Why does it know what you'll do before you do it? Because it isn't your story, Mara. It never was." I backed toward the door, shaking my head. "You're lying. This is some kind of game." He didn't follow, just stood there, his eyes unblinking. "Look at the last page," he whispered. "See for yourself." I wanted to throw the journal into the fire, to let the flames eat every word, but I couldn't. It sat on my lap as I turned to the final entry. The date was today. The words were short, sharp, and final. "She will discover the truth. She is not the maid." My hands trembled so hard the journal slipped from my grip. It landed on the floor with a heavy thud. My heart hammered in my ears. Not the maid. What did that mean? I thought of the locked doors, the whispers, the way Mrs. Leonard drifted past me without acknowledgement. I thought of how Mr. Leonard watched me, not with suspicion, but with certainty. certainty that I wasn't what I thought I was. That night, the house shifted. The shadows seemed to stretch longer. The reflections in the glass distorted just slightly, like my face didn't quite belong to me. When I spoke aloud, my own words echoed back a second later in a whisper, not my own. I pressed my palms to my ears, but the whisper slipped through anyway. Mrs. Leonard appeared in the hall once, her eyes hollow. She stopped in front of me, tilting her head. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Instead, she reached out and touched the sleeve of my uniform. Her hand was cold, almost lifeless. Then she drifted away again, leaving me shaking. I tried to leave. I grabbed my bag, stormed to the front door, and pulled at the handle. It wouldn't budge, locked, bolted from somewhere beyond my reach. Every door I tried was the same. Even the windows, heavy glass panels, wouldn't open.